Hare Krishna, everyone. Just pull up. Okay. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Today we'll be reading from Canto 1, Chapter 18, verse 21. The verse is Atapiyat Adanak Nakavashrishtam Jagat Virinuchopartar Hanambha Shisham Punati Anyatama Mukandat Ko Namaloke Bhagavat Padartha. I'll read the word by word. Atha, therefore, api, certainly, yath, whose, padanaka, nails of the feet, avashishtam, emanating, jagath, the whole universe, virincha, Brahmaji, partha, collected, arhana, worship, ambha, water, sa, along with, Isham, Lord Shiva, punati, purifies, Anyatama, who else? Mukundat, besides the personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna. Ka, who? Nama, name. Loke, within the world. Bhagavat, Supreme Lord. Pada, position. Arthat, Artha, worth. Translation. Who can be worthy of the name of the Supreme Lord but the personality of Godhead Sri Krishna? Brahmaji collected the water emanating from the nails of his feet in order to award it to Lord Shiva as a worshipful welcome. This very water, the Ganges, is purifying the whole universe, including Lord Shiva. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. The conception of many gods in the Vedic literatures by the ignorant is completely wrong. The Lord is one without a second, but he expands himself in many ways, and this is confirmed in the Vedas. Such expansions of the Lord are limitless, but some of them are the living entities. The living entities are not as powerful as the Lord's plenary expansions, and therefore there are two different types of expansions. Lord Brahma is generally one of the living entities, and Lord Shiva is the medium between the Lord and the living entities. In other words, even demigods like Lord Brahma and Lord Shiva, who are the chief amongst all demigods, are never equal to or greater than Lord Vishnu, the supreme personality of Godhead. The goddess of fortune, Lakshmi, and all powerful demigods like Brahma and Shiva are engaged in the worship of Vishnu or Lord Krishna. Therefore, who can be more powerful than Mukunda, Lord Krishna, to be factually called the supreme personality of Godhead? The goddess of fortune, Lakshmi Ji, Lord Brahma, and Lord Shiva are not independently powerful. They are powerful as expansions of the Supreme Lord, and all of them are engaged in the transcendental loving service of the Lord. And so also are the living entities. There are 4 sects of worshipful devotees of the Lord. And the chief amongst them are the Brahma Sampradaya, Rudra Sampradaya, Sri Sampradaya, descending directly from Lord Brahma, Lord Shiva, and the goddess of fortune, Lakshmi, respectively. Besides the above-mentioned 3 Sampradayas, there is the Kumar Sampradaya, descending from Sanat Kumara. All of the 4 original Sampradayas are still scrupulously engaged in the transcendental service of the Lord up to date. And they all declare that Lord Krishna, Mukunda, is the supreme personality of Godhead, and no other personality is equal to him or greater than him. So this chapter is entitled Marriage Parikshit Cursed by a Brahmana Boy. This is where the curse takes place in this chapter. So in the beginning of this chapter, Sukadeva Goswami begins with glorifying Parikshit Maharaj, telling why he's the great king and why he should be revered. And after he gives that description, the sages are now asking Sukadeva Goswami, it's amazing to hear the glories of Parikshit Maharaj, but can you tell us the topics that Parikshit Maharaj heard from Sukadeva Goswami? What was that discussion? What was that knowledge that was discussed? And then they say, well, tell us specifically, tell us the activities of the Lord that Sukadeva Goswami told Parikshit Maharaj. And so before Suta Goswami directly answers that question, he sort of gives a preamble to that, which is he's saying back to his sages that, hey, this question that you've asked me is a very fitting question, and it's the right question to ask. In fact, everyone should be asking this question. It is the best subject matter that you're asking about. And again, the question being, please tell us about the activities of the Supreme Lord. And then in this preamble, Suta Goswami is giving the evidence of how Krishna is the supreme God, and in fact that someone even as elevated like Lord Brahma, is collecting the water from Krishna's feet and giving it to Lord Shiva. Even someone as great as him is doing that. So yes, sages, this is the right question to ask, considering such elevated personalities are worshiping Krishna. So that's sort of the overall context and the point that he's is behind this verse. He's assuring the sages that this is the right discussion. So in the exact verse, Lord Brahma is collecting the water and passing it to Lord Shiva, and it's sort of it goes to show that a great personality like him is collecting that from the lotus feet of the Lord, and then he's passing it to another great devotee, Lord Shiva. So he's helping another great devotee in that quest for getting Krishna's mercy. Sort of what the translation is pointing to. In the purport, Prabhupada makes a couple key points, really two key concepts he tries to deliver in the purport. He begins with very clearly saying that the concept of many gods is completely wrong according to Vedic literatures. There's only one God, there's only one Lord. He's very clear about that. But he can expand himself in many ways. And so he's saying that, when you have such great personalities like Vishnu, Lakshmi, Shiva, one could say that they're expansions, but they're also worshiping Krishna. That's still the one God that they're worshiping. So Prabhupada is saying that, yes, there's only one Lord, and one might ask, okay, but then why are there other expansions or other personalities? That doesn't make sense. And so Prabhupada is qualifying that by saying, even those other expansions or personalities are still in service and worshiping to Krishna. He specifically says in the purport that such expansions of the Lord are limitless, but some of them are living entities. The living entities are not as powerful as the Lord's plenary expansions. So Srila Prabhupada is talking about the different kinds of expansions that Krishna can take. And so Lord Brahma comes in this living entity expansion category. And then Srila Prabhupada says Lord Shiva is actually the medium between the Lord and the living entity. So he's not at the living entity platform, but he's that medium. He doesn't fall in that category specifically. So, and then Srila Prabhupada, of course, says that, look, even someone like Lord Brahma, Lord Shiva aren't necessarily equal to Vishnu. we actually hear something different about this in the Brihad Bhagavatam, which we'll go into later. But I thought the way Srila Prabhupada brings up this point by saying that there's only one Lord, you might hear about other expansions of that, but they're all still in service to Krishna. He's sort of clarifying all those doubts by giving that information. One of the verses I wanted to refer to that further solidifies this point and really emphasizes that Krishna is the only Supreme Lord is verse 18 from chapter 15 of Bhagavad Gita. I just wanted to read the translation and a bit of the purport. This is Krishna talking to Arjuna, and he says to him in the translation, because I'm transcendental, beyond both the fallible and the infallible, and because I am the greatest, I am celebrated both in the world and in the Vedas as a supreme person. I'll just read the first paragraph of that purport. Prabhupada says, no one can surpass the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, neither the conditioned soul nor the liberated soul. He's therefore the greatest of the personalities. Now it is clear here that the living entities and the Supreme Personality of Godhead are individuals. The difference is that the living entities, either in the conditioned state or in the liberated state, cannot surpass in quantity the inconceivable potencies of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. It is incorrect to think of the Supreme Lord and the living entities as being on the same level or equal in all respects. There's always the question of superiority and inferiority between their personalities. The word Uttama is very significant. No one can surpass the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So he's providing evidence in this verse where if anyone has any doubt about the infallible even being superior to Krishna, Krishna is even superior to that. And so it further solidifies the point that Krishna might have these expansions, but Krishna is above that. And so it just sort of further solidifies this point that Srila Prabhupada is making about Krishna being the Supreme Lord, even though you've elevated personalities like Brahma and Shiva worshipping Lord Krishna. The second concept that Srila Prabhupada talks about is that even with such great personalities like Lakshmi, Shiva, Lord Brahma, they're all still engaged in the worship of Krishna. And they're showing that by example. And Srila Prabhupada backs that up with, there are 4 sects of worshipful devotees of the Lord. And the chief of them are, I think he says them purport, the Brahma Sampradaya, Rudra Sampradaya, the Sri Sampradaya, which directly descend from Lord Brahma, Lord Shiva, and Lakshmi. And he's saying that, but look, all of them conclude that Krishna is the supreme. So they're showing by example that Krishna is the one to worship. I wanted to go a bit deeper into this point about how they see the Lord. It's often talked about. We often talk about sort of the relationship a devotee should have with Krishna and with respect to the relationship a devotee should have with demigods. And Srila Prabhupada is sort of alluding to this point in the purport that, look, even the demigods are worshiping Krishna at the end of the day. And I wanted to read some excerpts or some parts from Srimad Bhagavatam where Lord Brahma describes his point of view, his point of view of sort of where the demigods stand with respect to Lord Krishna. We often hear other perspectives, but Lord Brahma gives his own perspective in terms of where Lord Krishna stands and where sort of the demigods stand. And I think it's very interesting to understand that directly from Lord Brahma. So before we go into that, though, just some context of in these verses in Brihad Bhagavatam. This book is essentially where Narada Muni is in the search of an advanced devotee. So he's trying to find the most advanced devotee. And the way the book is set up is that Narada Muni goes to a specific person. Let's take, Lord Indra, for example. In the search of finding this advanced devotee, and that Lord Indra refers to another person. Hey, I'm not the best, but this person actually is the best. And so he goes to the next person, and that person says, no, I'm not the best. Actually, this other person is the best. And this sort of keeps happening. This book is basically, the first part of this book is Narada Muni going to different personalities and hearing why they're not the best, but this other person is the best. Ultimately, Narada Muni gets to, Vrajadam and sees the gopis' love, and that's where he realizes their love is the best of Krishna. So in this journey, Narada Muni approaches Lord Brahma and Lord Shiva, and then they describe their relationship to Krishna, with Krishna, and it's really sort of interesting and sweet to hear that relationship directly from them, and why it's so important to worship Krishna. Again, solidifying this point that Srila Prabhupada is making here. So I'll just read a few passages from there, making different points. So Narada Muni approaches Lord Brahma and tells him, I'm told you're the most advanced devotee here. And so Lord Brahma responds with a couple points of why he's not sort of the supreme here. And he gives reasons why he's not the supreme. So the first one he gives is, Lord Brahma says, in reality, I've actually committed a lot of offenses against Lord Krishna. He says, in one of the purports, it says, Lord Nrsimha was not going to excuse Brahma for his bad judgment because Brahma had been born from the Lord's own navel. After all, Brahma was still a finite jiva with a tendency to make mistakes. The context here is, when Lord Nrsimha was, when he was passed by Prahlad Maharaj, because no one else could pacify him, finally Brahma approaches Nrsimhadev, and Nrsimhadev sort of scolds him and says, you should not have given all these boons to Hiranyakashipu and these demons. You have to stop doing that. It says that even after that scolding between Nrsimhadev and Brahma, Lord Brahma still continued to give these benedictions to Ravana later, right? It says, the Lord's judgment was later confirmed when Brahma gave Ravana supernatural power. Misusing that power, Ravana disturbed the world, offended Lord Ramachandra by kidnapping Mother Sita, and committed other odious crimes. And so even though the Lord has admonished him, he continued to sort of give these boons. And so Brahma is saying, look, I messed up, in these few scenarios. And then Brahma goes on to say, not only did I sort of mess up a few times here and there, but even the other demigods that I appointed in their various positions, they also made mistakes along the way. He gives examples. He says, hey, Indra offended Krishna by trying to destroy Vrindavan in the wake of Govardhan Puja. And he fought Krishna when Krishna took away a Parijata flower tree for his queen Satyabhama. And various times criticized Krishna. And then the next one he says, Lord Varuna arrested Krishna's father Nanda for bathing in the Yamuna at a forbidden time during the last minutes of the night at the beginning of the Dvadashi. And then Yamaraj took away the young son of Krishna's teacher, Sandipani Muni, allowing the demon Panchajana to kill the Brahmana boy. And then Kuvera's servant Shankachula tried to kidnap Krishna's cowherd girlfriends, and as described in the Puranas, the two sons of Kuvera were cursed by Narada Muni. And then, he sort of keeps giving evidence of where and why the demigods are not necessarily the supreme, and why they should be worshiping Krishna to Narada Muni, he says. And then, of course, one of the sweetest one of the passages that takes place in the Krishna book is when, Brahma steals the cows and the and the cowherd boys for an entire year, thinking that Krishna could be tricked. And so to that, when he realizes, Brahma is saying that he thought himself arrogant because he had now dared approach with prayers and obeisances to the Lord he had repeatedly offended. And then Brahma, when he realized the mistake, he tried to focus his mind on Krishna standing before him. And when he started offering those prayers to Krishna, the Lord didn't immediately respond to his prayers. It describes actually took some time for the Lord to respond to his prayers. And so again, he gives the second part of evidence that look at this pastime that I'd sort of committed a mistake. And the third part that Lord Brahma talks about is, principal demigods like Indra and myself enjoy high posts in the administration of the universe. But after carrying out these duties, they get tired of this burden. And in the middle of all this pomp and luxury, Brahma says, the demigods quietly harbor this desire for liberation. And again, in chapter 15, verse 18, in Bhagavad Gita, the one that I just read, Krishna says, I'm above the liberated, the fallible, infallible, and so on and so forth. And so Lord Brahma, says that, yes, we're in this concept of heaven, but we actually become tainted with, and over time become burdened with this pomp and luxury and sort of lose the purpose at times. And then finally, the last part in this section of Srimad Bhagavatam, Lord Brahma glorifies Lord Shiva, and he makes a point where, yes, he says, look, we've committed these offenses, but there's still a way for how Lord Shiva and the demigods should be perceived. And he goes to describe that. He says, the translation of this verse says, to consider Lord Shiva different from Krishna is a serious spiritual deviation. The personality of Godhead tolerates offenses against himself, but not against Lord Shiva. And then the commentary, it says, Lord Shiva is described as a recipient of Lord Vishnu's mercy. But this does not mean that the two lords are different from one another in the same way that Lord Vishnu differs from the Jivas. And then he gives evidence. One who sees differences between any of Lord Shiva's qualities and names and those of Sri Vishnu is an antagonist to Harinam. Lord Vishnu cannot tolerate offenses against Lord Shiva. And because Lord Shiva is the greatest of Lord Vishnu's empowered incarnations, Lord Shiva is especially empowered to distribute in the material world the elevated tastes of pure devotional service. And so one of the things that I sort of, took away from when I was reading this is, he makes a very strong point here that, sure, the demigods may not be the supreme, but at the same time, Krishna can't take offenses being made to his devotee. And so, while Lord Brahma is setting the record straight about where the offenses he's committed and with the various things that have happened, he's also reminding Narada Muni that doesn't mean you can commit offenses towards the demigods, because we don't care so much, but Krishna won't even tolerate that. Krishna will not tolerate the offense to his devotees. And again, the purport of this Bhagavatam verse, Prabhupada is saying that, look, the demigods are trying to set this example by worshiping Krishna. So there's no need to try to offend them, because that's sort of the example that they're setting. Anyway, I thought this section in Srimad Bhagavatam does a really good job of sort of describing this relationship between demigods and Krishna from their point of view, which we rarely get to hear. Those are the main points that I wanted to cover from this section. There was some feedback about I mean, I guess there was some questions that I had in mind that I just wanted to pose to the group. I would love to hear any thoughts on this. I'm just curious if, if it's okay, if anyone had any sort of personal struggle in changing their faith from, let's say, from demigod to Krishna. Did anyone sort of go through that challenge themselves? I'm just curious to hear if anyone's willing to share.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Please accept my humble obeisances, all glories to Srila Prabhupada. I haven't had the difficulties between demigod and Krishna, but coming from a Christian background, I went from impersonalism to Krishna, which I suppose could be somewhat of a comparable struggle of the transition from, even though it's the same God, but God with a personality is yet still almost as if it's a different God from my initial perception. And initially I've had the difficulty to connect with Krishna, whereas I felt like the impersonal kind of the Brahman Paramatma realization, kind of like internal energy, God relationship, if that makes sense. And then how it worked for me to connect with Krishna was through the disciplic succession. So through Srila Prabhupada and spiritual master, that's how it's worked best for me to go from impersonal to personal. Every time I've had struggles, internally, I've reached out to Srila Prabhupada, my spiritual master, and that's always, brought me back, centered me, and helped.
Thank you for sharing, Prabhu. That's very interesting to definitely. I really like the point about how what helped you was engaging that disciplic succession. Ultimately, that is what helps solidify and bring that faith to Krishna. But thank you for sharing that. Anyone else curious to hear?
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Yeah. No, for me, actually, it's more than the demigod to the Krishna. It was like, I mean, I know it was big from that perspective, not to change that kind of faith, but from Vishnu and Krishna, that took a lot of time. Because I could not even believe it. Why, when I was hearing first, why Krishna is the not Lord, I mean, I was having that kind of challenges. I mean, I was not able to believe or trust. So, but by continuous hearing and having continuous hearing and then good association with the devotees helped me to understand that they're not just telling for the sake of telling. So it is they're based on the authority, right? So that we are hearing these messages. So.
Yeah. I was especially asking because I feel like it's so rooted in the Hinduism, Indian culture about, fasting for various occasions.
That's right.
And so I personally, I guess, mostly grew up here in the US and in the movement. So I didn't see so much of that, but I know, like, when I look at my parents' generation or beyond that, I know that there's a lot of emphasis on, like, all over, right, about worshiping other aspects here. So that's why I was curious.
Yeah, the hard thing, I hear Prabhu people talking about it. I mean, if they don't do some worship to some demigod, and it will be a problem, right, for them. So I mean, for the individual. So because something happens, if something happened, they think, because we did not do this, so that's why. People are so worried. It's out of fear people worship. I mean, God, right? That we know. I mean, not instead of duty and love, right? It's more as based on the fear, right? So that is one big challenge to come out of it.
Yeah. Like, worshiping out of fear instead of from a loving perspective. Yeah.
Duty or love, at least. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Prabhuji, I missed the question. Can you please restate the question?
The initial discussion question that I'd asked was, did anyone else have any struggle in changing their faith from worshiping any of the demigods to Krishna? Like, was that a struggle for anyone?
Yeah. Okay, Prabhuji. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada and Guru and Gauranga. Prabhu, I didn't have any difficulty changing faith or anything, but because you mentioned the fasting part, so I was always raised with believing in Krishna, but there was also a part, two parents were from different backgrounds that I had. So different background meaning different faiths, not religion wise, but just as you said, demigod. It's not a demigod, but I don't know if you heard. There's Swaminarayan and then Krishna, right? So my dad was Swaminarayan. So we always followed both of the things, but always more it was leaning towards Krishna. But when you said about fasting specifically, I do remember and recall I've personally had done a couple of fastings, especially for Mondays, because my mom used to say that for Shiva. So to get good husband. Yeah. So I had done those Monday fasting. And then I also did Thursday fasting. So that was like for, good career and, knowledge, so to say. So I had done those things. But as when you said, if there was difficulty in changing, I never had that. But I do know like a lot of other people, close to me who had this faith in demigods, and then for them to come to Krishna, it was very I think after keep on reading and like keep on hearing things, that is when they were able to come to Krishna. So initially it was very hard for some people that I know to even think that Krishna, they thought that, and still right now I still have challenges convincing just everyone, right? It's still like some people are convinced and some people they're still like, no, everyone is God. So I remember even in Diwali, like just last year, it was just very difficult, or 2 years ago, that I was, and I think I was one to offend demigod too, I think, personally, because after hearing all this and not to worship demigods as gods, I was still during Diwali when we do this Ganesh Puja and this Lakshmi Puja and all this, right? I didn't feel like I wasn't connected as I used to be connected in doing those pujas. So then I had to reach out to one of my mentors to see, like, I'm this feeling, is it correct? And it's because I just felt like I was present doing the puja, but I wasn't I was feeling something weird inside, thinking like I'm committing some offense or something. Because I didn't want the family to feel that, oh, look, she's not even believing in this now. So I still sat through and everything. But then when my mentor said, it's okay to worship demigods as demigods and worship Krishna as Krishna. So it's not, that is when I started understanding that, okay, it's not bad. I just have to change my thinking that, it is still devotees of the Lord. And also another mentor had said that, you always worship demigods in a way that, to give you Krishna Bhakti, because they are empowered to give you Krishna Bhakti in that way. So now all those things, when, as I said, I did those Mondays and all this. Now, if I ask any demigods, I would say, please give me Krishna Bhakti. So at least I'm not disrespecting them. And there's like the medium of like respecting as well as understanding Krishna as the Supreme Lord.
Thank you for sharing that, Madhuri. That's really nice to hear that. I definitely saw the I remember I'm seeing folks in my family go through the various fasting. It took time for them to change that part of the faith. And then I liked your point about maintaining that respect towards demigods and really understanding the the place
Right.
when worshiping them. So yeah, thank you
Yeah,
for
because initially I thought that, I was doing something wrong to worship them, but then
sure.
understanding the difference. And then, as you even mentioned in your lecture, right? You have to respect the demigods because they're also devotees of the Lord.
Yeah.
So that is when I was just relating all that that I had gone through.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing, Mataji.
No worries. Thank you, Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. To Mataji's point, I also face a similar challenge. Earlier to Krishna consciousness. Hello. Oh, okay. Earlier to Krishna consciousness, I used to worship Ganesha. Then I used to worship Shiva. I used to worship Saraswati. All these things. But now, even when I go to a temple or some other place, even though I prostrate in front of those deities, all that comes to my mind is Shri Shri Radha Krishna ki jai, Radha Shyam Sundar ki jai, and Radha Vrindavan Chandra ki jai. And nothing else comes to my mind. I don't know. I also feel that disconnect, but at the same time, I'm very careful not to disrespect them.
Yeah.
And instead, I ask them, particularly Ganesha, to remove obstacles in my path for spiritual progress. So
That's nice, Ruru. That's a really nice way of looking at him and approaching it that way. That's nice. There's on all the points you guys described, I felt there's one element that's important, and that element is like just having good maturity, right? To understand this concept that Srila Prabhupada is talking about, these four sects of the Sampradaya and how they ultimately worship Krishna. Oftentimes as new devotees, especially as just brand new devotees when you join the movement, sometimes one could get into this mentality where it's, everything else I should be ignoring, and there's a way to recognize the place of demigods and not commit offenses against them at the same time. And sometimes the new devotee syndrome can lead you to actually cause offenses because one may not know maturely how to go about it. So as both of you were sharing, I felt that I also took away that having that maturity is important, so you don't offend the demigods, or you don't offend a new person that has just joined or that has that faith, right, towards everyone. You have to come with empathy and sort of evidence is source in the scripture as you go through that process. So I just felt like that was another important thing. It's that maturity in Krishna consciousness. Any other comments or thoughts from anyone on this verse? Okay. Thank you, everyone. Have a great Krishna consciousness.